I'm Helen Gallogly. I worked as a textile artist on the Outlander series for just about 5 seasons, printing and painting fabrics for many of the principal costumes on the show.
Sort of tell us what got you interested with fabrics and art. What came first?
I think as long as I can remember, I've always liked making things. It's just been come from just a curiosity that it's hard to pinpoint because my family aren't creative and no one that I grew up around was creative or made things. But I've always had that urge to just make and play with materials. And I can remember that from a very, very young age, going through paints in the shed and various bits and just wanting to just build things and, make a mess and not worry about what it would be for, but just I always enjoyed the process of exploring materials and playing. But my parents or my mum got me interested in community theatre from quite a young age. And we have a carnival in our town, which myself and my sisters got involved in. So we were involved in making costumes and involved in the parades itself. It was, I think, for sure that had a big impact and influenced my interest in theatre and in costume and in making, for sure. And it's been the process that I've gone through as a maker. It's changed. I've gone through various stages throughout my I suppose career so far, and it continues to change. And I've decided that's I used to resist that, but I really enjoy that now. I think it's part of the creative process of being an artist, is that you are constantly finding different avenues to explore and working in different areas as well, and not just having to decide that you are a maker or a textile artist or one thing or another. I really love that. I've explored different areas, and I'm currently going into or exploring another area within the arts. So, but going back, I think my interest in theatre was definitely very strong. I got involved in community theatre, drama groups and things as I grew up, and was just very interested in. I was interested in performing at one time, but just very interested in also everything else that was going on that was involved in how this piece of theatre, would come together. I used to enjoy just being part of that process and just watching what other people were doing, and so I think my interests were and still are, I think, quite varied. But I decided to specialise in constructed textiles, which really I was working with mixed media in a sort of mixed media capacity. So textiles for galleries, really, as opposed to making textiles for fashion or costume. So I had, I was really, that was a definite interest. I was interested in process artists like Eva Hess. I really always really loved her work, and that's very different from the sort of work I went on to do, with Outlander, for example. But I think it's just a good, I find it interesting just to share that, because it gives an indicator of where my interests lay. And she's a process artist. So her processes are, are completely visible within her work. So I really love that about that way of working. But after graduating, I kind of wanted to go back and explore surface pattern more broadly as well. I felt the pull to kind of go down that avenue, and away from the gallery textile side of work, and was interested in possibly connecting with theatre and film, but wasn't sure how I would do that and how that would happen at that stage. So I remember I was in Dundee studying, and I started talking to, I wrote a letter into Dundee Rep Theatre and asked if I could just come along and volunteer initially, because I didn't really have skills that I could offer in terms of making, because I'm not a trained maker. But I thought this is just a way for me to connect. And then some years later, I then got a job there working as an assistant in the costume department there. So from there, I got into working in other capacities in the theatre, and with other theatre companies. So really, yeah, I think I think it's quite important to share that even though I had training, I had a degree, I also just went back and volunteered as well, just to try to make connections. And I think it's a really valuable thing to remember if you want to connect with a particular area of work that you're not skilled in. Just go and volunteer, go and write letters, just turn up, and put yourself out there, because you'd be surprised in what comes back from that, because I think it shows a keenness and a willingness, for a company, a production, somebody who's running a company to see that you are what you're kind of willing to, you're kind of brave enough to just put yourself forward. So that's something I would very much recommend anyone doing. Yeah,
I mean, that's really interesting, because I think that's important, that people think that these sort of jobs are unachievable, and it's good to hear that you've just got to have the enthusiasm and to keep just plugging away at what you want to do.
Absolutely.
So it must have been quite an exciting moment to get onto a TV production like Outlander.
Yeah, I mean that still feels. I've said this, I've said this, and I say this often. It still feels like it didn't happen, as an experience when I look back, because it was so. I didn't see it coming at all. Really? Okay. Just because it felt just too good to be true. That could be that my fabrics could have a broader interest, or could even connect with what was going on. So we met, and very quickly she began talking about how we're working in this 18th century world, and that some of the fabrics I was making that have got 18th century influences, she really liked. I wanted to bring in some of this sort of these kinds of fabrics, and essentially asked if I would she basically asked if I would then like to come and make fabrics for some of those costumes. So I still was like, I still almost like it, not to be too dramatic, but it's quite emotional to think about that, because it's exactly that's just an incredibly rare opportunity for somebody to take such an interest at her level, and to want to then include what I was doing. And it was really extraordinary. And I really was on a cloud, I was so happy. I couldn't believe it, but I was also terrified, because I was then thinking, oh God, I need to really nail this. I've got to do a good job, of course. So it was excitement and also terror together, because I didn't want to let her down, or anyone else. So it was a little harder than being more visible in the production in that way, because everyone is looking at everything you're doing it's less part of something. When you're making a printed fabric, that's very visible. So as exciting as it was daunting as well.
Yes,
for sure.
So what would you say a typical day was for you?
I think it would vary, but I had a space. I had like my own room to work from, because I needed the printing table and a desk to work from. So I would be often by myself. There would almost every day I would. We'd come in at 8. We'd start the day at 8 a.m. Sometimes a little before, but I used to love that start, because it was quiet. It was all quite chilled out. How did you come on, put the radio on, just start getting everything out on the table, and just check in with what my plan was going to be for the day, what I was working on, and then usually drawing was always a part of each day, because I would usually be moving between various tasks. So there might be a fabric that we were painting and printing, but I would also need to be getting on with developing other designs as well. So I would be moving between tasks. If the fabric was already out on the table and we were printing, then it would just be a case of coming straight in, apron on, get the inks mixed up, and just carrying on that particular run of fabric, and then cleaning that up, moving all that aside, and then starting over with the next project. It really varied with the tasks, but usually I would make a good start, then check in with Terry. She'd just come in, just have a look at what I was doing. We would check in with what she wanted to get started on next. So then there would just be usually a meeting in her office, and then she'd come through and have a little look at what I was doing. And so it would be, I think most of my days were always in that room, either drawing on the computer if I was doing any adjustments to any artwork, and then with an apron on, mixing inks and making a mess. And then there were always moments throughout the day where different people in the department, you would need to kind of check in with each other. For each costume, there was just usually that necessity to check in with what I was doing because it would then be going to the makers next, and usually they would maybe come in and just start to kind of check how the design was, how the fabric was developing, and getting themselves ready for then how they were then going to apply that to the costume and to the pattern pieces. And I remember having conversations with some of the makers. They were bringing in the pattern pieces, and we would just be laying them out, and then tracing paper and things over the top, and just figuring out, okay, how the design would be laid out across, within the pattern pieces, for example, and figuring that stuff out, because for them, they're then thinking about how that's going to come together. And of course, I always used to quite enjoy when, for example, with the sort of dress backs, the way all those panels would come together, and you would have, I quite enjoyed when the patterns didn't match, and you had this kind of, the patterns kind of cutting at various points. I always liked that, but of course the more, for the sort of, more expensive, I suppose, and the higher end costumes and pieces, making the pattern connect so that it flows across the piece. That was a whole area that we had to also think about, and really I can't take credit for that, because that was the skill of the costume cutters and makers to make that make the pattern kind of come together. But we would have to have conversations like that to figure that out and make sure I was placing things fairly accurately so that they could then match it.
So what was the most complicated piece of fabric you had to paint for which costume?
It's tricky. I think I'd say actually the dress that the saffron dress that Claire wears in season 2, which is the beautiful kind of yellow saffron fabric with the printed front skirt panel and bodice. So that was probably the trickiest, because there were different layers. I was screen printing at one layer, and then screen printing a second layer in a different with a different screen, and then painting various parts of that. And I remember that just took quite a while to get the scale right. So that was a whole nother part of just trying to kind of make up. We had to make these big kind of paper versions at different scales to show them to Terry to check in with her as to the scale it should be. And that's the brilliant thing about her as a designer is, she knows, that I would look at it and think, oh, that seems right. But then she'd say, no, it needs to be, that needs to be small, that needs to come in a bit, that needs to be round like this, twisted or turned. She would make these suggestions, and she was right, of course, because she knows. That's the great thing about her as a designer, is she really understands how things come together, which is something that in costume terms, I don't really have that skill set as to how everything comes together in a piece of costume, and in her case, having to think about hundreds of costumes. And of course, there are assistant designers as well, but and they're all allocated different groups of costume to work on. But yeah, I think that was definitely a tricky one, just with having lots of things to think about. But yeah, it was still, they all had their challenges, in different, in different ways.
Which costumes were you involved with, Helen?
So it's tricky to think now. I might have to actually get my
yes.
book, because that might be useful to. I always kept a swatch of different things to reference. The juggler's waistcoat. This was season 2, so this was a sort of a costume piece that Claire wears. So it's like a costume piece within the show. So that was like a test piece for that. So that was one of the first pieces I worked on, I think. Lots of ideas for Gayless Duncan that we worked on, and I'm trying to find, that was one of hers. I think that was the season 3 fabric there. And then the painted dress for Louise de Rohan, that was season 2, so that was another. And I'm going to completely forget her name. Jocasta.
Yes.
So there was a whole bunch there for her, and there were just so many that went to different people. And I actually some of them day players as well. And actually there are lots, I can't remember which fabric goes to which character. But now I'm trying to find ones that would be more. All of these are different. This is a pocket print of for another piece, and I can't remember now who ends up wearing that. But I'll skip forward and I'll find.
And these are all fabrics that you actually drew and painted yourself.
Yeah, everything. I mean, these were all. This is a lace design. This is all hand drawn. This was a copy, because I think the originals are all with Terry, but these were all from my reference copies that I had. But that's all hand drawn, which were lace, going to be sort of lace dress prints for Claire. So all of these were all original. Some of them were referenced from historical fabric. So this was a dress that, now I forget who wears this. Now again, this is the hard thing about keeping track of everything you've done. But I think it might be a dress of Claire's, but it's another principal character if it's not Claire. That's another one I forget. So that's Saint-Germain.
Yes.
That's his fabric there. I'm not sure about this one now. Some of them it's hard to remember where they all went. But so there's another. Oh, here we go. Oh, so there's Claire. There's the this, which was the fabric that. Find the right one now. Sorry. For Claire's banyan, which she wears in season 2. So that's another one there. So again, this was all just hand drawn, pen and ink, and then transferred to screen, and then they're then screen printed. And then even things like this. This was a bonnet that I made. So this was one thing that I did actually make, which was all hand painted, and so that was like a smaller little job, which was, I think that's somewhere in season 5, but I don't know where that lands. So I don't have everything in here. I've got a whole bunch in various other places. But yes, in season 4, there's a dress that Claire wears at the start, which we call the River Run dress, which is it's kind of almost like a kind of a greyish colour because it was dyed, but it was all drawn from or printed from like an original watercolor, and so that one was a digitally printed fabric. So there was a real variation early on, all sort of hand painted and printed, and then later on we brought in a more sort of digitally printed fabrics because we wanted to have all of the color. But if you then have you need 12 to 18 meters potentially of fabric for a dress, you can't really paint all of that. And we did for a couple, but it's just too much to kind of keep that going. So there were some that were, but they were all printed, digitally printed, sorry, but then all from my sort of kind of original artwork, and then painted back into in places as well. So there's lots of to be honest, each costume I feel like had a different process. There was almost always a slightly different approach each time, for various reasons. But that was so much fun. That was the fun thing about it always. It felt like there was room to play. And Terry was just, I feel like I've not had the chance to say this enough, but that it was as enjoyable as it was because Terry was the most wonderful person to work for. Like, I can't say that enough. She was just, I've worked in lots of, theatre sort of projects before and in costume departments before. And, it's rare that you work with somebody who is, I can't explain it. I really liked her as a person. She was just a really kind of sound, kind of interesting and funny and good-hearted person. And she's also a great designer. And she was just, gave me a lot of confidence and freedom, which I think is quite rare. So I think all of the thanks I have is it all goes to Terry, and the gratefulness of the opportunity. I feel that's the gratitude I feel is all goes to her for the opportunity. So yeah, it's
wonderful. So where are you sort of going? What direction are you taking now?
So it's interesting. It's kind of a twofold, really. One is, after all these years, I've got into, sorry, keep doing that. After all these years of, since Outlander and my work on the show, I had always wanted to share a little bit about my processes. But I couldn't really figure out quite how to do that and whether I wanted to really do that. But one strand I've started exploring more recently is I think sharing, really concentrating on the process side of what I was doing and sharing and talking about that. So that's one thing that I've begun doing, and sharing that in the form of talks and workshops as well. I really enjoy workshops and enjoy the talks, because I do those with groups who are really interested in the processes and interested in Outlander, but also quite broadly in costume and in making, and in kind of the idea of storytelling and through fabric, and how that happens. So that's something that's been a real joy that I've begun exploring in the last year. But kind of separately to that, although there is like an overlap, I've really began working more as a visual artist. So my first love, and I think my kind of my passion, I think, really rests in making visual artworks, and more specifically in the last 3 years, I began a site-specific project. So I've always had a real interest and love in historic buildings and in collections and museums and artifacts with a history, and the kind of the intrigue of being in a location that has a history. I'm really interested I've always been interested in the effect that has when you visit a place that has a history. And my interest in more recent years has been wanting to make work that responds to that, and essentially bring in audiences to interesting locations, and to share, and creating work to share with audiences that really discuss the story of a location and its history through surface pattern and printed works as well. So I'm very close to an amazing location here in Perthshire called Innerpeffery Library, and it's Scotland's first free public lending library, and it's the most incredible place. I recommend anyone go there if you get the chance, because it's an incredible piece of history in itself as a location, but you can go there and handle and look through these incredibly, rare books that are, 400, 500 years old. And the experience of being able to do that is just had a real impact on me. And so I began working with them to research a body of work and create artworks that respond to the collection, to the location. And I've been then I delivered an artist talk a few years ago, and I have an ongoing relationship with them. And the object is to create a finished exhibition of work in the library, hopefully within the next year. So that's my current project, one project that I'm working on. So yeah, that's.
And you're also running short courses, aren't you?
Yeah, yes.
Fabric and
yes,
textile.
The workshops and courses and workshops has been something that I've always enjoyed teaching and skill sharing, but I'm realizing just how interested people are really in the work that we did on the show, and how that work and those skills and processes, people are really interested in finding out about those, and how and applying them to their own projects, their own work. So that's something I've been doing with venues. I do privately as well, and I'm beginning as well an online course, so I can share all of these sort of skills and processes with a broader audience. There's a huge audience out there, and people really want to have been contacting me to kind of find out more about this stuff, and so that's really been the influence to begin this other way of of skill sharing. So that's that's on the cards.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. It has been wonderful talking to you today.
Oh, not at all. Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to you as well.